What's going on, guys? So we're going to be going over the trade reviews for the week. It's only Tuesday, so there isn't really much to talk about here. But the few charts that I did like throughout the week so far have been W. We'll first go over Wayfair just because I really like how the volume was shaping up on this chart for just a quick little bounce. Uh, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, technically 6 different weekly prints in a row that all had obviously drawdown on the underlying, right? And this was all pushing down into these relative equal lows that were sitting at 38, 37. And then we made one more new lower low from this low, and the volume is really ramping. The heaviest volume that we've actually had from a weekly perspective since July of 2023. Now, when you go into the daily chart and you look in really dissect, sorry, when you really dissect the price action that's happening off of this daily time frame, you'd be able to see how the volume anomaly started to kick in a little bit on this day, which was the earnings day, as well as a few trading days later on November 6th, we got this gap down and we got really heavy, strong recovery with a lot of the volume actually pouring into the lows, as well as kicking in as we started to get the recorrection higher, right? And this is all, like I said, just into a very critical area on the chart. I really like this daily print right here. And then look what happened subsequently is that we take the low of the volume anomaly candle and we had a failure to obviously displace out of that area and then create a new low or break the low. We technically made a new low, but break the low, retest, and fall, right? So I'm just looking for simple reversion back up into basically where your external sitting, and then you have a gap fill sitting all the way up into 44. So I knew the risk reward was really there. This could still offer us a re-entry. I cut everything just because this could digest a little bit more throughout this range and then finally get a spring and then move. So it could, chop around, and then finally dip, pull back higher, higher low, and then go, right? There might not be enough fuel within this trading range here to be able to push with ease into the top of the gap. Now, do I think it happens? I do, but that wasn't really realistic enough for me to catch that whole entire move all the way up into 44. So, this name has a decent ATR, first of all, to it. If you want to take out your indicators and pull out the average true range and look at this from like a perspective of ATR, it has a $2.50 ATR, right? And that's actually very big considering this is a $40 stock, right? The $2.50 ATR would technically be just right around about 7% on the underlying, right? So this is a very volatile name. And we actually, if you go to the weekly, what happened was we first initially got our bounce, increasing volume on the bounce, and then it pulled back, like I said, one more time into weekly volume anomalies that were very clear here. And we do have a slight little gap ever so slightly beneath us in a 36.42. So what I did was I saw the momentum given off of the open over here on this day, and I sized in and I said, you know what, all right, I'm just going to risk an hourly print closing beneath this or the orb low of this day, and I bought some December expiration here as well as a day trade into today on 2-week out expiration and a week out expiration. And this was a really nice momentum just up into this resistance, and it was a very clean, easy trade. When you're looking at like your internal based resistance, it was basically resting on the Monday session close with a little tiny increase in volume up against that resistance. And then the next following day, what happened was we got the open, we popped up above it, we held it on the 15, and then we pulled higher all the way up into this high over here, right? So this is a very easy trade where it was on watch down at 38, like 50-ish, took it up into 42, had some size on the higher lows, and I was just basically looking for this to move with ease up into at least this resistance or up into 42. Not the greatest trade, not the worst, not anything that I would hold as a great example of a great trade to be taking. My better trade on the week has been DraftKings, and this is a great glimpse on what would be a change of hands, which I will make a video after this on. And what we're looking at here, guys, would be a previous distribution that led to its markdown recorrective phase down here and into the gap fill with the heavy volume from November 3rd. And then what happened was we got our higher lows, we broke through the gap, held the gap, and then reclaimed the bottom of the previous distribution's lower extremes, which would be this support, the support here before the markdown. And it was all basically generated off of this bull gap, right? So once we pull higher, we find a weekly lower high technically. So here's your weekly lower highs, here's your high, lower high, and then lower high. However, this last lower high had some wicks to those weekly prints that were pulling us down into the previous distribution's lower extremes, as well as if you go to the daily chart, this is also where you would likely hold a progression gap from the daily perspective, right? Which would be, I'll mark it out in purple so you guys can see the differences. That would be the gap that I was looking at for this to hold, which was basically off of 35.50 into 34. And then that led us into whenever we had the whole entire growth movement happening, ARKK catching a bid ever since November 6th. A lot of this volatility within ARKK has to do with, it definitely has to deal a little bit with Tesla, but whenever you go into something like SQ, you go into a lot of these different growth names like Shop. A lot of these have been seeing really nice moves, Roblox, and DraftKings is a Kathy Wood ARKK name. It's a holding within ARKK, and everything looks really good and prime for upside once we start to see this diminishing volume, tight range pullback where you're really getting no progress from any seller. It basically just looks like some sort of trend break once we get into the November 6th, which was a gap up, followed by a rest into the resistance here that was sitting off of 39.31. And from there, what happened was we broke through, we cracked that level on a lot of volume for the report, and we got a pullback actually on the report. And I added some swings off of 39.31, basically this hourly resistance, and also off of that trading session's higher low, or I'm sorry, a higher low off of that trading session's opening print. So this was a really nice swing, basically took it back all the way up into this swing high. It got a little bit above it. We cut mostly everything. I left a little bit of runners, and then I cut them once I saw this digestion candle. I think I cut them actually the next following. I think I cut them on this session here as well as Wednesday once we got that gap up. And then I was basically just looking for a simple add on the pullback into the peg, or just this simple level right over here, because now we can basically start just start saying to ourselves that this is going to be a change of hands, because we had lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, and then once we break through on a lot of volume and we start to pull back on decreasing volume, that's whenever everything gets a little bit better. Looking in terms of now looking for a daily higher low, right? We were in a previous stage of distribution that completed into the gap fill, followed by a rip, harmonic volume retracement into the lower extremes of the previous distribution, as well as this earnings gap that wanted to obviously be defended in a higher low, just simply off of this previous higher low. And once we were able to identify this, that's whenever I said, okay, now we're going to get more of an internal based higher low. Which was on the Friday session. I added into the Friday session, which was basically just a base off of 39.31 with a nice little close and a slight little wick off of that area into the close of that day, right? So we had some weaker, not a lot of volume here, but we had some weaker opening to Friday. And then once we just based it into the close, we opened up into the next day. A lot of volume came into the day, the next following trading session. And then basically what I was looking for was a seller to obviously be absorbed off of the gap right here, or just simply put, a seller pulling their ask off of the gap, and then I would be looking for momentum into the top of the gap fill at 41, and then if we could claim that and get over that, as well as the top of the earnings gap itself, then maybe we could start looking. This is not an earnings gap; it's just a gap up. Then maybe we could start looking for control of where the previous weekly lower high was, right? So this is all just for a wider perspective of control of where the previous weekly lower high was, and that's exactly what we got here. As you guys can see, the next following session, what we did was we rip, and then we closed actually on top of the gap. which is the top of the gap right here at $42 almost. And then we pulled back, we held that area once again, and then we started to find momentum and a really nice rip into today, as well as a rip into the close. So I still hold these swings. I'm looking for momentum above 43.33, and then I would start really looking at what could be obviously a push into just this resistance up here. And I already scaled most of this position just because the targets have already been met. We already caught a really nice move on the underlying, and those December 20th calls ran 150% from low to high. Ads were off this area. It's about a $4 move or a 10% move on the underlying. And this name still definitely has juice left in the tank, I think. And if you look at the weekly chart on this, guys, from the swing high, you take your little trend, this is pushing right into that weekly trend line, right? So you want to de-risk most of the position. You want to leave only about a fifth of runners, right? But this was basically, if you guys look at the hourly chart, and I also pulled fibs from low to high whenever I'm looking at my entry model, just for a lower high. Or I'm sorry, a higher low, and that is right off of the 0.50 at 39.21, right? So you get out of that, and then you look at the next following trading session, you can start pushing your trailing stop up a little bit higher. And this is just basically a very easy trade of scaling into a name that has a theme, a supportive theme with the general market. And there wasn't really much more to this trade. Very simple, very effective. If you're an EMA guy, it also had confluence to the 9 and 21 on the Friday bar, which is where our size was. There was also an increase in volume, and the top end of this range was really low, dried up volume once we started to get these 3 days of digestion here. So we filled the gap, we claimed the gap the next following week. We pushed higher, increase in volume on the push higher. We're now back above those moving averages as well as that 9. We're playing with this swing high over here, and the swing high we can basically conclude that this swing high is fully absorbed. So I do expect DraftKings to break 43.33, and I do think this thing will have room up into the wick, so just about 44.60 or up into 45.62. I really like this chart. I just think something's really ready to go here. And Friday was a really nice opportunity. So with that being said, we now move into Google. So we had a nice little gap set up here, a gap trap on Google. This actually reminds me of the Apple trade previously over here, where you have this bigger bull gap and everyone's watering their mouth at this thing, filling the entirety of the gap. And it doesn't always work that way because gaps are pockets of liquidity on a chart. So we can basically conclude that there's going to be a lot of sellers, or I'm sorry, buyers here. I mean, obviously, if it's a bear gap, we would consider that to be sellers. And we had however many days of support that were kind of created here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And then we got this gap down, and not so clean of a daily print, but it was into the bottom of a bull gap, right? And then it gaps the next following day higher, reclaims the previous daily support that was already kind of being made here from September 19th into October 4th. And once we kind of claim that area and then close the trading session on that area, as well as close above the previous trading session high, then they squeeze out high tight flag on the hourly, and then it basically just has enough fuel for itself to get all the way back up into this resistance and then eventually into the swing high, right? So when we're looking at Google, the level above us is fully absorbed. This is all sitting off of where we had a previous bear gap. This is just like I said, how bear gaps are typically a resistance, bull gaps are typically a support, right? And this is a bull gap beneath us. We had a bear gap above us. We can now conclude that a lot of sellers are absorbed off this spot essentially just because we have a major buildup of structure beneath us where, okay, you're getting a fill of the gap. That's your preliminary accumulation. You get a shakeout that's into obviously a rip higher, really nice clean digestion, almost looking like an inverse head and shoulders model. And then from there, what happens is we move our way higher off of this daily/weekly base that's sitting here for where the weekly higher low was at. and then you go into your daily chart. We got the back test of the levels, so this is not going to need any sort of new test, right? Typically, like I said, I like to look at balanced charts that all kind of have their really clean structural retests. So basically, off of this candle, I was looking for a higher low, which is also sitting within the gap. Now, I wanted to claim the top of the gap as well as the bottom of this previous bear gap. The more important gaps, the more recent gap, because this gap is all filled. It's just if you claim it, you want to claim that and then bid on top of there. And what I was ultimately looking at was this to be a really nice clean opportunity off of the top of the gap, 173.60. If you go into your 15 or your hourly, we got our opening print right off of the open, right? I sized in right off the open once I started to find a little bit of momentum here, actually on this candle. And then we got some pullbacks right after a pop. I scaled the pop a little bit too aggressively. However, we got a pullback. The pullback was on pretty low volume. And once the volume dried up down towards the lows, pull out the extended hours, and what do you think I'm going to draw? I'm going to draw a pre-market low to the current swing high on an intraday perspective of this and start looking at ads off of the 618. And then once we find a little bit of momentum off the 618 and eventually back above the pre-market high as well as the 175 psych, then I'll be looking for a push right back up into a new high and eventually above that. And that's exactly what we got, right? Because why would I not be looking for a new high if the pullback is on lower volume and then we start to find a buyer off of our first higher low for the day? So I sized into some more Google off the 618 as well as around the 175 psych, and it was also holding with tweezer looking bars right off the 175 psych on the 15, which the 15 is one of my top tier indications there. So once I found a little bit of confirmation here, especially with an increase as we started to find the bounce, I took some ads off of like 175.50. And this was a really nice move that was almost like it went with ease up into the new highs, right? And then we found low volume off the new highs. We cracked through the new highs and we found really nice strong momentum. If you go into your regular trading session hours, basically just looking at the upper ranges up here, and this isn't really for a multi-day move. It could be for sure. But I scaled most today just because this trade ran 75% and yeah. So that was the Google trade. Nothing too crazy there. Where was my... Okay, yeah, so I already had a nice win on Google from the open up into the like top of that area where some were scaled, and then I realized, wow, this is giving us even more opportunity off that 618 bounce. Nice opportunity for some 618 ads. And yeah. So OXY, this is still a trade that's pending for me. I'm just playing off of this candle here. Most of my ads were actually on Friday on the back test of this previous support that actually had a breakdown failure on the report, followed by really nice strong recovery into a closure back above that level. Then we pulled back once again, or I'm sorry, we pulled back again today. We found a nice little buyer into the close. Everything looked a little bit exhaustive on the OXY chart for today, and I feel like this is definitely a good sign. We have a little tiny gap that's sitting all the way down here. It's not really too relevant of a gap, but it would just bring one more test of this daily level, which is like 49.97 into 49.91, right? So it's a 9 cent little area where this can maybe pull back. Most of my ads were based off of swing low, swing high, 618, which was tying in directly with the daily level as well. And this was a win actually, as I sized into 50. I got a pop into 51.30. That's a nice little move on the underlying. I didn't scale it because I'm looking more for a multi-day move for this thing to potentially push up into the gap It unfortunately pulled back today, but yet again, was today really any much of a seller? I don't think so through the volume that I'm seeing on this chart. We had pretty low volume off of the open, and then we actually had a 15-minute hammer, and I bought swing low, swing high on smaller time frames off of a discounted range. So I had a little bit of my averages moving up into 50-32. My average isn't necessarily directly off of 50. I think I was down 16. I think I was down 13% down here. It was like 16 to 13%, but I don't know if the spreads were messing with my P&L or anything. But this pot, I added a little bit more today. It popped back up into plus like 2% on the position, and I really want to see this thing start getting it back above like today's trading session high or Monday's trading session high. And I think that this thing could push with ease up into like 52, 52.50, and I'm using the 52.5 strike. So I think I could get these in the money this week or next week, but as long as we find a little leg off of where a potential higher low could be on the daily from this bar, I think this could be a really nice, strong risk to reward trade to move up into 52.69, up into potentially 54. If you guys want to take a look at your long side position RR calculator, you could, I guess, have a risk off of like that level. A lot of ads off of that level as well, and then obviously a reward up into the top of the gap or the bottom of the gap. I would call it probably a 3.5 R. Basically looking at $1,000 risk with a $3,000 reward, maybe a $2,000 risk with a $6,000 reward, but I also have not added the full entire size to have that kind of risk yet. So I'm leaving a little bit of room just in case some chop kind of messes with me here. And then we'll see what happens, right? Yeah, that's just the beauty of the game sometimes, guys, is that you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but as long as you stick to your plan, as long as you stay disciplined with your ads off of optimal entry areas, then this could be a really, really, really nice trade for upside. I would say if you go into the hourly, you could get a little bit better of a measure of risk, and I think this would basically be my risk here. I could take it down into this low at 49.51, but I feel like I should have a little bit more of an expiration there. And I think that this could push up to the gap with ease. I feel like this level's already kind of absorbed up here. I feel like it's not going to really have a hard time pushing a little bit further into that gap and maybe to the top, right? So if I'm looking at my original plan here, this could potentially be a 5R swing trade. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. And then there was really nothing else for the day. Ford was a swing that I had. It caught some news, but it had a very ugly ball. I don't even think this was news. It was just big time volume off this area. And it initially caught a really nice pop, and then it faded back down. It actually swept a decent bit of resistance and held it as a big wick, and then it saw some drawdown. Once I started to see the drawdown, I said, you know what, I'm cutting this. I added a few times off of all of this support, right? So once I saw the pop and then the drop, that's whenever I decided I'll just cut because we have a bull gap beneath us, and my original plan was actually off of Ford on like one of these days. I actually added on this day where the wick filled the gap, and then we got like an inside bar. We got a little bit of momentum, just couldn't get a strong daily print. Had a little bit of drawdown, was back green, and then once I saw this wick, I was like, okay, yeah, that's enough of this. I can't be doing this. I think it actually took out or retested to a T on that high at 1132. Yeah, right to the high, to a T actually, off of 1132, and it saw a big fat failure. So I was like, you know what? If this thing wants to do something where it pulls back down, holds the bottom of the gap, or fills the gap, or sweeps the gap, anything it really wants to do here, then I could just simply look for a new trade off of the gap, right? I don't really want to, there's not too much of a signal here anymore. And what I was more and less looking for was for some momentum to happen off of this candle because it was the strongest print that we had within this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-day consolidation range here. So if we never got the momentum the next following day, then I would be out. So basically, you could just take the previous trading session high, look at it, and that should be a major red flag for you on that candle. And it was for me. So once I saw some pullbacks and drawdown, I think I was up 20% on the swing with December 20th expiration at the top of this pop, maybe 25. And then it pulled back and actually went a little bit red. And I cut it for like a 6.5% loss, call it 8% with the spreads. Not a big deal. But yeah. So that will be it. And then as far as for my focus for the week, we have NVIDIA earnings, so semiconductors are fully dependent on those earnings. I really do like this as my vehicle for a alongside trade again. We already hit this trade, really beautiful trade here on December expiration, over 100% on the swing ever since we had this Dow Jones removal dip. It was a headline that came out about INTC, didn't really care about it, bought the dip, we got paid. I will be looking at this thing if it wants to sweep this low, just pull into the gap, pull into discount from 23.95 into 23.36, and if we could fill the entirety of the gap or just find some sort of buyer off this general area and then maybe pop back up above 24.59 from that pop, from that low, it would look something like this: pop or drop, pop, higher low, pop, higher low. I would be looking for the secondary higher low entry or this higher low here. I don't necessarily want to front run this, and I want to see if it can obviously sell. If NVIDIA sells, if it's a relatively strong name, maybe I'll just take a quick little day trade at it. But that's going to be on my focus. I feel like a ZOM higher low can definitely be on its way. Do I necessarily know where that's going to be? No, I don't. I feel like this thing is in its final stages of looking for a markup, and you kind of want to just take this chart from a week by week print just because the daily or the weekly chart is so coiled that we want to make sure we get really nice use out of this name, right? And you don't want to be front running a lot of things. You guys got to really keep in mind this is more of your local, more recent level that needs to be claimed. But when you're looking at this from a much wider perspective, guys, it's basically just the 119.63 area is a massive area, or just look at your current trading session or your weekly trading session high. That would also be a very, very key spot on the weekly. So I feel like if we could spot a higher low here and this thing could shake out a lot of people off of this sell, which isn't on a lot of volume, then maybe we could start looking for a pop back up above the weekly level and then start looking for a path of least resistance trade into 122 that extends all the way up for a gap fill up into 124. That could be a decent trade there. There's nothing really else. There's nothing else that that really caught my attention. I kind of like Roku, but Roku might need a little bit of time. I feel like we did absorb the November 15th sell candle here with a really nice inside bar, trading above equilibrium of this candle. Keep in mind, guys, this was a massive gap. It popped down. It had a lot of volume with a wick behind it. It filled this little bull gap over here, as well as just got a major back test of this previous daily resistance, reclaimed it, started to find itself a pop. It filled the entirety of the gap. The top end of the gap fill was on lower volume, and then the market sold off as a whole on November 15th, I believe. Yeah, so Roku was kind of in agreement with that. Maybe because it's okay, Netflix didn't really do much there, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I really do like Roku. Google was already a trade that played out here. Obviously, a back test on Tesla was also a really nice trade for this week with a size in on Friday. I personally prefer Roku, or I'm sorry, Google over that kind of trade just because we have more reliable risk levels here. And we could read price a little bit better rather than just obviously front running this being a retest and a nice strong retest, then push our way higher. I didn't really like this weekly print here, I'm not going to lie. So a lot of volume behind that. Doesn't look really the greatest on top of this like previous resistance area. And there was never any true retest we could have taken this off of. So Yeah, you'll get a lot of people that speak on hindsight about how this was such an easy trade, but really wasn't. And then everything else has just been pretty quiet. I mean, we have Apple here where we're looking like we could get a change in hands, and I feel like this chart doesn't look the greatest, especially given the fact that we're holding this daily level for 1, 2, 3, and 4 consecutive days on end. We did get kind of a weaker close, and I feel like this could definitely be a decent trade to the downside. It's just, is tech going to sell throughout this holiday flow period where shorting stocks aren't exactly the most of my interest right now. So yeah, and then we'll go take a look at the things that I was saying. So this was alrighty. So this is what I was tweeting about over here, guys. This was the Google chart, and this is what I was seeing in real time. Saying I was loving this chart, and that was on the part of the weekly focus. I'll go to my thread and we'll review that list and maybe look at some missed opportunities. But aside from that, I covered everything. Yeah, so here's my little scan that I had uploaded through this Twitter thread, and this was just basically talking about my tech long side focus on Google, on the bull gap watch, on the back test of 170, or the entirely filled gap up into down into 169.75. I thought that was going to set up for the Thursday data, but it didn't, and we had a really nice strong tape on Monday, so I was like, fuck it, this is going to see some continuation just because of the bullish volume patterns on that peg. INTC just been pretty quiet. W already talked about. DKNG. Yep, that's everything covered. So the rest of my focus, guys, is this list here that I had. But a lot of these focuses weren't really anything too relevant to me. We had Zom potentially, but I didn't like the daily prints we were getting over there. OXY, it's kind of building out for itself. W caught that. Cat, we'll go over that chart. I don't know what happened over there, but my triggers never set. I never had any alert that was like, oh yeah, this is breaking where you want it to break, and let's take some calls. Google already played. SQ probably missed out on that one. UPST, that one's actually still setting up, I believe. So I will be watching UPST as well tomorrow. And just throughout the week. I really do like this chart. I'm not a big fan of the premium, but I really like how we have a break and base level here. We never actually took the earnings candle low on this bar, and the volume's really drying up after a really nice peg formed here of plus 46% on the underlying. And what I oftentimes talk about is plus 46% on the underlying. Typically, you're going to need some digestion just because obviously with price expansion comes digestion, and then vice versa, with digestion comes expansion. So I talked about that a lot in my videos, right? So this isn't really too much of an A+ setup for me, but we're also this is a heavy short interest name, which is also a little bit different, right? Because you could get a lot more volatile whenever structure and the chart don't really make sense on this thing, seeing continuation. But that's just the beauty of the short squeeze names, right? So I'm not going to lose sight of this chart. We have our previous swing high sitting here at 72.58, which has also just been a resistance. So technically, this would be a breakout failure of a previous level, of a previous swing high, right? Do I think that this could be a fade up into the gap? I definitely do, unfortunately. I feel like it's going to catch a lot of people off guards. Maybe it needs a little bit more digestion. I personally probably won't be touching this unless I see a very strong major gigabid basically in the tape that's telling me that this is going to fill up into 77.48 with with ease. And I don't know if that's going to happen. Disney, it's probably just sitting within the gap, maybe seeing a little bit of drawdown. Yep, just another major move that likely needs a little bit of digestion. I really do like D-Dog. D-Dog's just been one of them names. Really nice strong bid today. Actually broke out of this massive range here, so this is going to be another focus of mine. We're we're basically on the verge of a massive breakout, right? This is a range that we've had on the weekly for 287 days, right? And technically longer, right? But ever since we had those lower highs from the swing high, this is 287 days. And this is also now just breaking out of that area. Really nice volume, really nice strong bid here today. Um, Amazing volume actually, and I really like this one to pull back. I'm going to be looking for just some sort of sign of strength off of what I would like for it to happen would be towards the top of that gap, right? But if that doesn't happen, um, maybe I can take just a simple break and go, right? And I think that this can now target at least, in my opinion, when we're looking at the chart. I think at least if you go to the weekly, you kind of need to go to the weekly for this one. I feel like this one could do 156 within a few weeks. 155, anywhere in that range. I think that this thing can definitely get there. Call it low 150s to be lenient. But this just looks like a very explosive setup. Everything's retested. Everything looks really strong structurally. And I've already talked about how this has been a really nice roll actually out of this daily range off of the support here. And it has been. And I think it's finally now ready to go. Really elevated volume relative to the rest of the range. As you guys can see, if you go to the weekly, you guys can obviously see how the volume was really ramping up on the weekly. And then we're basically just looking to take that external. So this could be a decent little breakout trade. But yeah, I really love this one. So that will also be on the focus. If you guys have any questions, please let me know and have a good night.